2:17 a.m. Christmas Eve. A retired Navy SEAL walking his dog through a frozen shipyard. A woman bleeding out in the snow. Badge stripped, gun gone, left to die. 6 words. That's all she had left. Don't call the police. They're hunting me. Before Logan Mercer could even process what that meant. Headlights. Black SUVs. Silent as wolves. Moving through the blizzard toward them. Someone had come back to finish the job. And the only thing standing between a dying detective and the men who wanted her dead was a former SEAL with a combat knife and a German Shepherd who didn't know how to quit. If you're new here, hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because this is just the beginning, and trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The snow had been falling since midnight. Not the pretty kind, not the soft, drifting kind that decorates Christmas cards and settles in clean layers on rooftops. This was harbor gray snow, industrial grade, wind-driven, the kind that came off the Atlantic in horizontal sheets and turned exposed skin raw within minutes. It came in sideways, found every gap in your collar, every unguarded inch of your face, and it didn't apologize. Logan Mercer had been walking for 40 minutes. He didn't sleep much anymore. Hadn't, really, since the discharge. Doctors called it hypervigilance, a clinical word for what was basically your nervous system refusing to believe the war was over. His therapist, a well-meaning woman named Dr. Holt, who kept a bowl of mints on her desk and said, "Unpack that, a lot," suggested the nighttime walks. Fresh air, Logan. Rhythm. Something to do with the body so the mind settles down. He hadn't told her about Harbor Grayport. Probably should have. The port was dead this time of year. Container terminals shuttered since October, the cranes standing like massive iron skeletons against the black sky, frosted with ice that caught what little light existed and threw it back cold and blue. The shipping lanes were iced over near the breakwater. Nothing moved out there. Nothing human, anyway. Rex walked at his left side, no leash necessary. The dog was 8 years old, ancient for a Belgian Malinois, and carried his own set of scars. A deep groove along his right shoulder from a fragmentary round outside Kandahar. A slight stiffness in his rear left hip that got worse in the cold. Logan had acquired him 3 years ago from a military contractor who was retiring the animal rather than paying for the surgery the hip needed. Logan had paid for the surgery. He didn't overthink why. Some things you just did. Rex had his nose working now, even in the blizzard. Logan noticed it, the slight change in the dog's posture. Not alarm, not yet, just attention. The ears came forward, the tail stilled. Logan slowed. "What is it?" Rex didn't look at him. The dog was staring into the corridor between 2 long rows of storage containers, stacked 6 high, frosted solid. The passage between them was maybe 10 feet wide, dark as a grave. The wind howled through it like something alive. Then Logan heard it too. Not wind, not the groan of settling metal. Someone breathing. Wet. Labored. The sound of a person working very hard just to stay alive. He moved. Not carelessly. He cleared the corner in a single motion, right hand already moving toward the fixed blade at his hip, body angled to minimize his profile, eyes scanning low first because people who are hurt or hiding go low. They always go low. She was on her knees. Or had been. By the time Logan found her, she'd collapsed against the base of the nearest container, half sitting, half slumped, one arm extended as if she'd been trying to crawl and simply run out of whatever was keeping her moving. Her coat was wrong. Too thin for this weather, clearly not hers, like she'd grabbed whatever was closest in a hurry. A dark stain spread across the left side of her blouse beneath it. Her face was a catalog of violence. Split lip, left eye swollen, nearly shut, a cut above her brow that had bled freely and then frozen. Her right hand, Logan noticed, kept reaching toward a holster that wasn't there anymore. Muscle memory. The gun was gone. She heard him approach and her remaining good eye snapped up. Wide, terrified, immediately calculating. Not the reaction of someone who'd given up. She was still in it, still fighting, even with nothing left to fight with. "Hey," Logan said quietly. He crouched 8 feet away, hands visible. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her eye moved to Rex. The dog had stopped at Logan's heel, watching her with calm, dark intelligence. "My name's Logan," he said. That's Rex. We're going to help you." She opened her mouth. What came out wasn't a scream for help, wasn't a sob, wasn't any of the things Logan might have expected from someone in her condition. She leaned toward him, a concentrated, deliberate effort, and said 6 words in a voice that barely carried over the wind. "Don't call the police, they're hunting me." Then she went limp. Logan crossed the distance in 2 strides and caught her before she hit the ground. He had her pulse, weak, but there. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. The wound in her side wasn't arterial. She'd have been dead already if it was. But she was in shock, losing heat fast, and whoever had done this to her had been deliberate about it. The kind of methodical violence that said professional. The bruising pattern on her face suggested someone who knew what they were doing. Targeted, efficient, designed to punish and incapacitate rather than just hurt. Her jacket pocket yielded a badge. Logan stared at it for a moment in the darkness. Gold Shield, Harbor City PD, Detective 2nd Grade. The name on the ID card beneath it read, Claire Dawson. He pocketed the badge and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the keypad. "Don't call the police. 6 words. He hadn't known her for 60 seconds, and she'd spent her last conscious breath on a warning instead of a cry for help. That told him something. Whatever had happened to this woman, she'd been alert enough, even beaten half to death in a blizzard, to prioritize the warning over her own pain. He didn't call. Instead, he lifted Claire Dawson into his arms. She weighed less than her injuries made her seem, which told him she hadn't been eating well, and turned to Rex. "Find cover," he said quietly. The dog was already moving. Rex led him 200 meters east along the container wall, then turned north toward the older section of the port. Pre-renovation, pre-everything. The part Harbor City had essentially abandoned when the new terminal opened in 2019. The infrastructure here was Depression era. Brick warehouses with rusted corrugated roofs, a decommissioned customs building that listed slightly to the left, and at the water's edge, a lighthouse that hadn't been operational since the 80s. The lighthouse keeper's adjacent warehouse was structurally intact. Barely. But the loading door on the south face had rusted open. Not enough to be obvious, just enough for a dog and a man carrying an unconscious woman. Logan got her inside. The interior was vast and dark, and smelled like old rope and motor oil and decades of accumulated salt. Broken pallets stacked along the walls. A rusted crane rig overhead. Enough structural debris to provide concealment and enough interior walls to break the wind. He set her down on a section of clean tarpaulin he found folded in the corner. Whoever had last worked here had been neat about leaving, and assessed her properly for the first time. The wound was a through and through on the left flank, just above the hip. Exit wound was clean, which meant rifle round at distance or a high-velocity pistol at intermediate range. No major vessel involvement that he could see. He'd had far worse in the field with less available to work with, which was exactly the wrong thought to be having because this was not the field. This was an abandoned waterfront warehouse in the middle of a Christmas blizzard, and he had a multi-tool, his belt kit, and exactly 1 chemical hand warmer in his jacket pocket. He improvised. He packed the wound with strips cut from the cleanest cloth he could find, the inner lining of his own thermal layer, and applied pressure with the confidence of a man who'd done this in the dark, in the rain, on 3 continents. His hands moved from memory. Check, pack, pressure, secure. He'd done this so many times that the clinical distance came naturally now. What didn't come naturally was the feeling underneath it. This wasn't a teammate. This wasn't someone he'd trained with, deployed with, shared meals with for months before everything went sideways. This was a stranger with a badge and 6 words and someone actively trying to kill her. "Don't call the police. They're hunting me." Logan sat back on his heels and stared at the ceiling for a moment. "Well," he said quietly to nobody in particular, "Merry Christmas." Rex, sitting 3 feet from Claire Dawson's head, looked at him without expression. She came back to consciousness in fragments. First, awareness of warmth, then pain, enough that her breath caught sharply and her hand moved instinctively toward her side. Then Logan's voice, calm and close, "Easy, you're okay. I've got the bleeding stopped." Her eye opened. The swollen one was completely shut now, dark and distended. The good one found him immediately, then swept the space, cataloging exits, threats, unknowns. Old habit, cop habit. Where? Old Lighthouse Warehouse, south end of Harbor Gray. No one knows we're here. My gun. Gone. I know. Don't worry about it right now. She tried to sit up. He let her, one hand steadying her shoulder. The effort cost her. Her jaw clamped, her eyes went white at the edges, but she made it to a semi-reclined position and stayed there, breathing through it. How long was I out? About 12 minutes? Felt longer. She looked at his hands, at the makeshift bandaging, at the chemical warmer he'd tucked against her ribs. Something shifted in her expression. Not gratitude exactly, more like recalibration, like she was updating her threat assessment and he'd moved from unknown to provisional ally. You're not a cop. Retired Navy, SEAL teams. Of course you are, she said, and there was something almost like dark humor in it. You said don't call the police, Logan said. I didn't, but I need to understand why. She looked at him for a long moment, testing something internally. Whatever she decided, it was fast. How much time do you think we have before someone finds this place? I tracked our approach carefully. Fresh snow is covering the impressions. Maybe an hour if they're good. Less if they have dogs. They might have dogs, she said. Then we need to move fast. Talk to me. Claire closed her eye. When she opened it again, her voice was flat and deliberate. The voice of someone who'd rehearsed this, who'd been telling herself this story in her own head for weeks, maybe months, and was now finally saying it out loud to another human being for the first time. I've been working organized crime for 3 years. Embedded. I'm talking long-term, low-profile, the kind of work that takes you somewhere very dark and leaves you there. About 8 weeks ago, I stumbled onto something that wasn't part of my assignment. What? Shipping manifests. Harbor Gray. 18 containers over the last fiscal year, all cleared through customs without proper inspection. Same signatures, same routing pattern. The cargo wasn't what the manifest said. Logan said nothing. Let her talk. I ran the signatures back through our department database. Every clearance, every single one, traced back to Captain Victor Kane. The name landed in the space between them. Your captain, Logan said. My captain, she confirmed. 31 years on the force. 3 commendations. His picture's on the wall in the lobby of the 7th District with a plaque underneath it. And he's running cargo through a port he's supposed to be policing. He's not just running cargo, he's protecting an entire network. The manifests were cover for weapons components, Logan, military grade. The kind of stuff that doesn't get exported legally. She paused. I think it's been going on for at least 6 years. Logan processed that. 6 years. During which time Victor Kane had been attending departmental holiday parties and giving speeches at police academies and pinning medals on the chests of people who worked for him. Who did you tell? Nobody. I went to Kane directly. Logan stared at her. I know how that sounds, she said. It sounds like you walked up to the man who was trying to kill you and handed him a warning. I know, but I had to be sure. I needed to see his reaction. Her jaw tightened. I got it. And then? And then I ran, 3 days ago. I'd been staying at 4 different locations. I had a meet set with a federal contact for tomorrow morning, Christmas Day. Someone I trusted outside the department. She paused. They found me tonight before I could make the meeting. How many? 4, at least. They hit me at the parking structure on Mercer Street, which, by the way, is a wonderful coincidence. Your name and the street, focus, Logan said. 4. I took out 2 of them. The third one had backup I didn't know about. I ran. I got maybe 6 blocks before... She gestured vaguely at herself, at the wound, the eye, the general catastrophic state of her. Here we are. Rex moved suddenly. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift, a reorientation of his entire body toward the exterior wall to the south. His nose came up. His tail stopped moving. Logan was on his feet before he fully processed the decision. Someone's outside, he said quietly. Claire didn't ask how he knew. She was already trying to get up. Logan killed the chemical warmer. Its faint orange glow was enough to be visible through the corrugated wall gaps, and moved to the southeast corner of the warehouse, pressing himself flat against the cold brick. Through a gap in the corrugated paneling, he watched. 3 figures, moving along the container wall in a tactical file, staggered, maybe 8 feet between each man, the standard spacing for a CQB search element. They were dressed in dark civilian gear, not police uniforms, but they moved like trained operators, disciplined, purposeful. They had a portable LED light rig, handheld, red-filtered to preserve night vision, and they were working the footprints. His footprints. The fresh snow had done some work, but not enough, and these guys were thorough. Logan looked back at Claire. She'd gotten herself upright, back against the wall, using it as a crutch. She'd found a length of pipe from somewhere in the debris. Her knuckles were white around it. He almost smiled. He held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward the south entrance, then drew an arc with his hand, flanking movement. She processed it, nodded. Logan turned back to the gap and watched the lead element pause 20 meters out, crouching. He was reading the tracks more carefully now, tracing the path to the loading door. 20 seconds, maybe 30. Logan moved. He came out of the shadows at the loading door frame, already low, already reading the spacing between the 3 men. The lead was closest, maybe 4 meters, crouched over the tracks, his light angled down. The second was scanning the roofline. The third had turned back to check their 6. Standard search pattern, predictable. Logan hit the first man with a controlled choke, forearm across the throat, weight into the leverage point, dropping fast and taking the man with him. The light clattered away into the snow. The man had enough training to try to break it. He grabbed Logan's arm, drove his elbow back. But Logan rode the movement, tightened the position, and held it until the body went slack. 11 seconds. The second man heard something. Not enough, just enough to start turning. And then Rex came out of the darkness like he'd been launched from a catapult. He hit the second man high on the right shoulder, taking him down and immediately redirecting to the forearm, which was the arm currently raising a weapon. The man yelled. The gun went somewhere into the snow. The third man saw everything. He was bringing his weapon up toward Rex when Logan, moving across the gap between them at a dead sprint, covered the distance in 4 strides and drove the man's weapon hand skyward, stepping inside the arm, torquing the joint, and putting the man face first into the corrugated wall with enough force to take the fight out of him. The man slid down the wall and sat in the snow, dazed. Logan recovered the dropped pistol, a suppressed SIG P226, professional grade, and crouched in front of the third man who was blinking at him with the slightly confused expression of someone who'd been promised an easy job and not received one. "The detective," Logan said. "How many more teams are out here tonight?" The man said nothing. Rex sat beside Logan and stared at the man with absolute patience. "He's not going to bite you," Logan said, "unless I tell him to." He let a beat pass. "I'm going to tell him to." 2 more elements, the man said. His voice was thickened, possibly a broken nose from the wall. "Perimeter on the north and east approaches. Radio check every 10 minutes. Who sent you?" "Nothing." "Your radio check is in," Logan glanced at his watch, 6 minutes. "When you miss it, those other 2 elements converge on your last known position, which is here." He waited. "So let's use the time well." The man looked at the ground. His breath was coming in visible clouds in the cold air. "Kane," he finally said. "Captain Kane runs the operation, the port clearances, the shipping network, the whole infrastructure. Tonight was about removing the last witness before the next shipment moves." "When does it move?" "Before dawn. The cargo's already in position. 6 containers. They move at 0430 whether this gets resolved or not." "What's in the containers?" The man didn't answer, but his jaw tightened in a particular way. Logan had seen that particular jaw tightening before, in other places, on other men who'd been asked questions they weren't supposed to answer. It wasn't defiance. It was fear. The kind that told you the thing he wasn't saying was worse than whatever you'd already imagined. The radio on the man's vest crackled. A flat, calm voice. Male. Professional. "Sierra 2, Sierra 3, status report." 5 minutes early. Logan looked at the radio, then at the man. "Who is that?" The man's face changed. Something collapsed behind his eyes. "That's Kane," he said. "He's here, at the port." Logan zip-tied all 3 men to the support columns inside the warehouse using their own kit. They'd come prepared, which meant they'd planned to secure Claire rather than simply shoot her, which told him something he filed away. He gagged them efficiently, collected both weapons, and turned to find Claire standing in the doorway watching him. She'd done something to brace herself, straightened up, compressed whatever was happening inside her, put the mask back on. She was still pale under the harsh angles of the darkness, still moving with the careful stillness of someone managing serious pain, but her eye was clear. "Kane is here," Logan said. "I heard. He's got at least 2 more teams in the perimeter." "I heard that too." She looked at the radio in his hand. "You're thinking about answering." "I'm thinking about what happens in 6 minutes when these 3 don't check in and Kane converges everything on this building. Then we need to move." "To where?" "You said your federal contact was for tomorrow morning. Who is it?" She hesitated. Not a long hesitation, but real. "A DEA supervisor named Ortega, Gabriel Ortega. We go back 5 years. He's solid, genuinely solid. Not the kind of solid that means clean until we find out he wasn't." "Phone?" "Dead. They took it when they grabbed me. Mine's encrypted, but the call will triangulate. If Kane has someone monitoring cellular—" "He does," she said flatly. "He has someone in the telecom operations unit, local cell traffic. He owns it." Logan thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Then we don't call from here. We move first. Get outside his perimeter. Then we figure out the contact." "And the flash drive?" He stopped. "What flash drive?" Claire held his gaze for a moment, something careful behind her expression, and said, "The evidence. Everything I found, the manifests, the financial routing, the communications I intercepted over 8 weeks. I didn't carry it with me. Too dangerous." "Where is it?" She took a breath. "You're going to think this is crazy." "Detective," Logan said, "in the last 40 minutes, I found a dying cop in a blizzard, killed the lights in an abandoned lighthouse warehouse, and taken down 3 armed operatives without firing a shot. My threshold for crazy has moved considerably." Something almost like a real smile crossed her battered face. "There's a 24-hour veterinary hospital on Callaway Street, about 4 miles from here. They have a dog named Sergeant. He's a 12-year-old German Shepherd, former K9 unit, retired out of the 7th District 6 months ago. He's been receiving treatment there for bone cancer." Logan waited. "His recovery collar," Claire said. "The padded one they use post-procedure. There's a false lining. The drive is in there." The radio in Logan's hand crackled again. "Sierra 2, Sierra 3. I need a status confirmation. Now." The voice was patient, controlled. The voice of a man who'd spent 31 years being exactly that. Captain Victor Kane. Logan looked at the radio for a long moment. Then he raised it to his mouth and answered. The radio hissed static for half a second before Logan pressed transmit. "Sierra 2, copy," he said. Flat. Even. No inflection, no hesitation. The voice of a man reporting nothing unusual, which was the only voice that worked in situations like this. A pause on the other end. 2 seconds. 3. "You're late," Kane said. "Negative. Sector sweep ran long. We had footprints east of container row 7 that needed verification." Another pause, longer this time. Logan kept his eyes on Claire. She was reading his face the way someone reads a map in the dark, carefully, looking for the thing that might get them killed. "And," Kane said, "false track, wind drift. We're clear." The silence that followed was the kind that had texture to it. Kane wasn't convinced. He wasn't panicked either. He was a man who had spent 3 decades in a profession built on reading people, and he was doing exactly that right now, through a radio signal, in a blizzard, at 2:30 in the morning. "Rotate your position north," Kane said finally. "Sierra 1 has eyes on the access road. I want your element on the waterline." "Copy that. Moving now." Logan clicked off transmit and looked at Claire. "How long?" she said. "Maybe 5 minutes before he figures out we're not moving to the waterline." He looked at Rex, who was already standing, already pointed toward the loading door like a compass finding north. "We go now." "The SUVs, east lot. I saw them on the way in. 2 vehicles, driver probably stayed with at least 1. "Probably," she repeated, in the tone of someone who'd learned that probably was how things went wrong. "Yeah," Logan said. "Probably." He pulled the door. The cold hit like a wall. The blizzard had settled into something steadier in the last hour. Less violent, more relentless, the kind of snowfall that didn't announce itself but simply accumulated, burying things quietly and without comment. The temperature had dropped another 4 degrees. Logan felt it in his hands first, then in the old scar tissue along his left forearm, where a piece of copper-jacketed shrapnel had rearranged some nerve endings in a way that made cold weather its own specific kind of unpleasant. He kept Claire on his right side, his left hand free, the suppressed cig tucked against his thigh. Rex worked point without being told, moving 15 feet ahead in a low, deliberate trot, his dark coat absorbing what little light existed. The dog understood noise discipline instinctively. No tags, no unnecessary movement, just steady forward motion through the snow. They moved along the base of the container wall, staying in its shadow, moving east. Logan counted paces, measured distance against the mental map he'd built on the way in. The east lot was 300 meters, past the decommissioned customs building, past the fuel tank array, across 40 meters of open ground between the last container row and the lot perimeter fence. 40 meters of open ground was the problem. They'd be exposed for roughly 8 seconds at a walking pace, longer if Claire couldn't hold the speed. He looked at her. She was keeping up, but it was costing her. Her jaw was set in a way that meant she was managing pain by converting it into anger, which was a sustainable strategy right up until it wasn't. "Don't baby me," she said without looking at him. "I wasn't." "You were looking at me like you were about to offer to carry me. I was calculating our exposure window on the open ground ahead." She looked at the open ground, looked at him. "How long?" 8 seconds. "I can do 8 seconds." "I know." Rex stopped. Both of them stopped with him, instantly, without discussion. 3 years with the dog had taught Logan that Rex's freezes were not suggestions. The Malinois stood completely still, nose working the wind, ears swept forward, body slightly lowered. Logan scanned slowly left to right. There. The customs building. Second floor window, or what remained of it. The glass had been out for years, the frame open to the elements. A shape in the darkness. Not wind movement, not structural settling. Something with a silhouette that had angles inconsistent with a broken window frame. Someone was up there. An overwatch position. Which meant whoever was in the east lot wasn't just a driver waiting by a car. The whole approach had coverage. Logan took Claire's arm and drew her back 2 steps into the container shadow, slowly, no sudden movement that would register in peripheral vision. "Overwatch," he murmured. "Second floor, customs building. He's got the open ground covered. Can we go around?" South route adds 6 minutes and takes us back toward where Sierra 1 is operating. She thought for a moment. "How good is your throw?" "What?" She reached into her coat pocket and produced a metal thermos lid, battered, like it had fallen off something and been pocketed out of habit. Or maybe not habit. Maybe Claire Dawson had been moving through this port for 3 days in her head, planning contingencies, accumulating anything that might serve a purpose. He took it from her, looked at the customs building, looked at the container row running parallel to it, east face. "Give me 30 seconds, he said. 20, she said. "We don't have 30. He moved north along the container wall, putting 30 feet of lateral distance between himself and their original position. Found a gap in the container stack, a narrow slot created by misalignment during storage, maybe 2 feet wide. He squeezed through it, putting the container mass between himself and the overwatch position, then moved along the far side until he had an angle. He threw the lid hard against the corrugated roof of the fuel tank array south side. The clatter was sharp and immediate in the cold air, directional, convincing. The shape in the customs window shifted, reoriented south. Logan moved. He crossed the open ground in 6 seconds, not 8, because he pushed it, because he was compensating for what Claire would need, and hit the east lot perimeter fence at a low crouch, pressing himself into the shadow of a concrete barrier. 1 SUV, a second, both black, both identical, both running, exhaust vapor rising in slow columns from the tailpipes. One driver, sitting in the lead vehicle, phone screen illuminating his face with a cold blue light, not paying attention to the lot, paying attention to whatever was on his phone. Amateur hour. Or someone who'd been sitting in a heated car for 90 minutes in a snowstorm and had let his discipline slip, either way. Logan moved to Claire's extraction point, back along the fence, where she'd come through after him, and found her already there. She'd made the crossing. Her face was tight with controlled effort, but she was standing, weight-balanced, functioning. He pointed at the lead SUV, held up one finger, then pointed at his own eyes, then at the driver. She nodded. One driver, visible. He went in low, using the second SUV as cover, moving along its passenger side to bring himself around the blind spot of the lead vehicle. He reached the driver's door in 4 steps, tapped the glass twice with his knuckle, the tap of someone who worked there, who had every right to be there. And when the driver turned to look, Logan was already opening the door. The driver got one hand up before Logan had him out of the seat, controlled, down, using the door frame as a lever. Not violent, efficient. The man hit the snow and Logan was on him before he could vocalize, forearm across the throat, enough pressure to make speech impossible, not enough to damage anything. Keys stay in. You stay here. You make a sound, the dog finds you. Rex had appeared from somewhere, standing 3 feet away, watching the man with the patient, impartial attention of an animal that had absolutely nothing to prove. The driver looked at Rex. Then he nodded. Logan zip-tied his wrist to the door handle of the second SUV using the man's own belt, improvised, but it would hold long enough, and climbed into the lead vehicle. Claire was already in the passenger seat. Rex jumped into the back. Logan put the SUV in drive and moved through the east lot gate slowly. No urgency, no wheel spin, the way someone moves when they belong somewhere. He kept the headlights on low, kept the speed at a steady 15 miles an hour until he cleared the port perimeter, then turned north on Harbor Access Road and put the vehicle up to 60. The blizzard swallowed the port behind them. For about 30 seconds, neither of them said anything. The heater was running and the warmth hit both of them like something physical. Rex settled across the rear seats with a long exhale, his chin on the armrest between them. 4 miles, Claire said. Callaway Street. I know where it is. Logan. He glanced at her. When Kane figures out his 3-man element isn't checking in, he already knows, Logan said. The moment we left that warehouse, the perimeter timing broke. He's reassessing right now. She absorbed that. Then he knows someone pulled his team. He knows something went wrong. He doesn't know what or who. Logan checked the mirror. The road behind them was empty. Just 2 lanes of snow-covered asphalt cutting through the industrial corridor, the port's crane silhouettes fading into the storm. For about 10 more minutes, we have the ambiguity. After that he starts working the variables, Claire finished. And the variables lead back to me. And to whoever helped you. She turned and looked out the window at the passing street. A gas station, closed. A tire shop, dark. The city asleep under its blanket of snow, completely unaware that about 4 miles south of here, a retired police captain was standing in a shipyard trying to figure out how his operation had come apart. I've been running this scenario in my head for 3 weeks, she said. Not to Logan, exactly. More to the window. Every version I ran, I was alone. Every version. Logan said nothing. Not once in any of them did I end up in a stolen SUV with a Navy SEAL and his dog at 2:30 in the morning. How'd those solo versions work out? She was quiet for a moment. Not great, she admitted. Callaway Street Animal Hospital occupied a converted Victorian building at the intersection of Callaway and 14th, a narrow 3-story structure with a green awning above the entrance. The awning bowed under the weight of accumulated snow, a single illuminated sign in the window reading, "Open 24 hours" in red letters. Warm light in the ground floor windows. The only lit building on the block. Logan pulled the SUV into the small parking area behind the building, out of direct street view, and killed the engine. He looked at Claire, then at the hospital, then back at Claire. You can't go in there looking like that, he said. I'm aware. They're going to want to call someone. I know. What do you want me to say when they do? She pulled down the sun visor and looked at herself in the vanity mirror. The swollen eye, the blood that had dried in a dark line from her brow to her jaw, the pallor that came from significant blood loss being managed by willpower and spite. Tell them I slipped on ice, she said. Nobody's going to believe that. Nobody has to believe it. They just have to be slower to make the call than we are to get the drive. She had a point. The veterinary staff were medically trained, not law enforcement. Their first instinct would be care, then documentation. That gave them a window, small but real. I'll go in first, Logan said. I have a reason to be here. He looked at Rex in the back seat. He has a limp that gets worse in cold weather. Hip, old injury. Rex lifted his head and looked at Logan with an expression that suggested he was aware of this conversation and had opinions about it. He's not going to like that, Claire said. He'll recover. Logan got out of the SUV and opened the rear door. Rex stepped down carefully, the old hip stiffness visible. Not exaggerated, just present, the way it always was when the temperature dropped this far. Logan walked him around to the front of the building and pushed through the entrance. The interior hit him with a wave of warmth and antiseptic smell, and the specific ambient sound of an animal hospital at 3 in the morning. Low, controlled, punctuated by distant sounds from the back treatment areas. A young woman at the front desk looked up from her computer. Early 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing scrubs with small cats on them. Her name badge said Tamara. She looked at Rex, then at Logan, then at Rex again, the way people always did. "Hi," she said. "Is he—" "Hip dysplasia," Logan said. "Old war injury. It flares in the cold. I know it's late. I'm sorry." Tamara was already coming around the desk, crouching in front of Rex with the unconscious ease of someone who'd been doing this her whole life. Rex submitted to the inspection with patient dignity. "He's beautiful," she said softly. "He knows," Logan said. She smiled briefly, still focused on Rex. "Let me get Dr. Vance. She's on tonight. She's actually great with working dogs." She stood up. "Can I get your name?" "Mercer. Logan Mercer." She typed it in. "And he is?" "Rex." She typed that too. "We'll get him sorted out, Mr. Mercer. If you can take a seat." The front door opened. Claire came in. Tamara turned and her face went through about 4 expressions in as many seconds. Professional neutrality, concern, alarm, the visible internal debate between her training and her instinct to immediately reach for a phone. "Ma'am, I'm with him," Claire said, nodding toward Logan. "I slipped on the ice outside. I'm fine." "You're really not," Tamara said. "Can I use your restroom?" A pause. "Of course. Down the hall, second door on your—" "Thank you," Claire said, and moved past the desk with the deliberate, controlled walk of someone refusing to let their body's distress become visible. Logan watched Tamara watch her go. "She needs a doctor," Tamara said quietly to Logan. "She's aware of that," Logan said. "She's complicated." Tamara looked at him with the steady, evaluating gaze of someone who'd had the full range of humanity through their door at 3 in the morning and had learned to read people quickly. "Are you two in trouble?" Logan met her eyes and was quiet for a moment. "We're working on not being." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm going to get Dr. Vance," and disappeared through the back. Logan sat down in one of the waiting room chairs. Rex settled beside him, chin on Logan's knee. The waiting room was small and overwarm and had a fish tank in the corner, cycling blue light across the walls. On a bulletin board near the door, there were photos of animals, dozens of them, recoveries and reunions, people holding cats and dogs with the slightly stunned expressions of people who'd been told good news after expecting bad. In the third row of photos, Logan saw the one he was looking for without looking for it. A German shepherd, gray-muzzled, wearing a blue recovery collar, standing beside a woman in scrubs who was grinning at the camera. The caption below it, handwritten, "Sergeant, 12 years old and still giving orders." Logan stood and moved to the bulletin board. He studied the photo without touching it. The collar in the photo was thick, padded, the kind used post-surgery to prevent a dog from interfering with a wound site. It had a blue-gray cover with a Velcro closure along the inside edge. And there, along the inner seam, visible only because the photo had been taken at a particular angle, with a particular light, a ridge. A slight unevenness in the padding that was inconsistent with the collar's manufactured contour. Claire had been thorough. Dr. Vance turned out to be a compact woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the economical movements of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on anything unnecessary. She examined Rex with quiet competence, asked 2 or 3 direct questions about the injury history, and then looked at Logan over the dog's back with an expression that said she'd noticed the suppressed weapon on his hip and had made several decisions about how to handle that. "Military?" she said. "Former." "The dog, too?" "Yes." She nodded, as if that closed the matter. "The hip is inflamed but stable. He's not in acute distress. He's managing it. He's good at that." She stroked Rex's ear briefly. "I can give him something for the inflammation. It'll take 20 minutes to kick in." "That's fine," Logan said. "Before you do, I noticed a photo in your waiting room, an older German shepherd. Sergeant?" Dr. Vance's expression shifted. Not suspicion. Something more personal. He's one of ours right now, yes, bone cancer. We've been managing his comfort. She paused. He's near the end, honestly, but he's peaceful. I'm sorry, Logan said, and meant it. Is his recovery collar the one in the photo? The blue-gray padded one? It is. We keep using it post-procedure to protect his chest. He associates it with the staff now, I think. He doesn't fight it. I need to see it, Logan said. A pause. Mr. Mercer. I know how that sounds. It sounds like a very strange request at 3 a.m. from a man with a gun on his hip. It does, Logan agreed. I can't fully explain it right now, and I'm aware that's not satisfying. But the woman who came in with me, the one who's hurt, she's a police detective. She's been trying to get evidence to federal investigators that proves her department has been running an international arms trafficking operation out of Harbor Grayport. The evidence is inside that collar. She hid it there because it was the last place anyone would think to look. Dr. Vance stared at him. She trusted Sargent, Logan said. Whatever reason she had, she trusted him with the most important thing she had. The doctor was quiet for a long moment. The fish tank cycled in the waiting room. Somewhere in the back, an animal shifted and settled. Come with me, Dr. Vance said. Sargent was in a recovery bay at the end of the treatment corridor. A large space, warmly lit, with a padded floor mat and a water bowl, and a folded blanket that looked like it had been brought from home by someone who cared about him. He was lying on his side when they came in, and he lifted his head at the sound of the door. His eyes were amber and clear and very calm. Logan crouched beside him. The dog looked at him without alarm, without enthusiasm, just a long, appraising gaze. The gaze of an old animal that had seen enough of the world to have no need for drama about any particular new piece of it. Hey, Sergeant, Logan said quietly. Rex had followed them in and now sat at the bay entrance, watching. Sergeant looked at Rex. Rex looked at Sergeant. Some kind of acknowledgement passed between them. Logan couldn't have described it. It wasn't threatening, wasn't warm. It was just two old working dogs recognizing something in each other. Logan located the collar's Velcro closure and worked it carefully. The padding was thick, genuine orthopedic foam, and the outer cover was stitched along its edges with deliberate, tight seams. He worked his thumbnail along the inner seam near the Velcro closure, feeling for the irregularity he'd seen in the photo. There. A section of seam approximately 4 inches long that had been restitched after opening. The thread was a slightly different shade, close, but not matching. Whoever had done this had been hurried, or had done it in poor light, or both. He worked the seam open carefully. Inside, wrapped in a thin layer of cling film to protect it against moisture, was a flash drive no larger than his thumbnail. Black casing, no label, a standard USB connector on one end. He held it in his palm for a moment. Everything Claire Dawson had spent 3 years building, 8 weeks of discovery. Evidence that had gotten her beaten and abandoned in a blizzard on Christmas Eve. Whatever was on this drive, people had already died for it. Or would have, without the particular accident of a retired SEAL and his dog needing a midnight walk. He closed his hand around it. Sergeant put his big gray head back down on the mat and exhaled slowly. Logan stayed crouched beside him for a second longer than was necessary. Good boy, he said. He stood up, nodded once to Dr. Vance, and walked back toward the front of the clinic. Claire was in the waiting room, perched on the edge of a chair, her coat off. Tamara applying a fresh bandage to the wound with the focused efficiency of someone running on training. Claire's face was doing the thing it did, managing everything inward, converting pain into stillness. She looked up when Logan came back through. He held up the drive. Something changed in her expression. Not relief. Not yet. It was something more complicated than relief. The look of a person who'd been carrying an enormous weight for a very long time and had just been told, for the first time, that someone else could see it. We need to... The windows exploded inward. Every glass pane on the street-facing side of the building came in simultaneously. Not an explosion, just the focused impact of something heavy moving very fast. And then the front door was already open and men were already inside, moving through the space with weapons raised and muzzles sweeping, and Tamara was on the floor with her hands over her head, and somewhere in the back of the building an animal was screaming in pure fear, and Logan had already moved, was already between Claire and the nearest entry point, the suppressed SIG coming up. And then a voice. Calm. Patient. The same voice from the radio. Mr. Mercer? Victor Kane stood in the doorway of the Callaway Street Animal Hospital, snow on his shoulders, a Glock in his right hand. 5 men fanned behind him in the space he'd just entered. He was tall, broad through the chest, with the particular build of a man who'd stayed physical well into his 60s. Gray hair, close cropped. The face of someone's grandfather, if that someone's grandfather had spent 30 years learning exactly how much violence a police department could absorb before it started asking inconvenient questions. He looked at Logan with something that wasn't quite respect, but was adjacent to it. You answered my radio, Kane said. Smart. Bought yourself a few minutes. He tilted his head slightly. Not enough, though. Logan had the SIG up, aimed at Kane's center mass. 2 of Kane's men had Logan in their sights. 2 more were flanking right. 1 was moving toward Claire. The math wasn't good. The drive, Kane said. Put it on the floor and slide it to me, and this ends cleanly. You're not part of this. Neither is she anymore. He glanced at Claire and something moved across his face, something that might have been genuine regret if you didn't know what he'd ordered done to her 3 hours ago. You were a good detective, Claire, one of the best I ever had. Don't, Claire said quietly. It's true. Don't do that. Don't make it about how good I was. You sent 4 men to put me in the ground. I sent 4 men to contain a situation, Kane said. Semantics matter less than you think when the alternative is losing everything. Everything, Claire repeated. You mean the operation, the shipments, the 30-something years of building yourself into something that cannot be touched. I mean, the people who depend on this department functioning, the infrastructure of this city. He said it like he meant it, like some part of him actually did. You would burn all of it down for one investigation. I would burn all of it down for the truth, she said. That's literally the job description. Kane looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Logan. The drive. Last time I asked. Logan's finger was on the trigger. His breathing was controlled. His arm was steady. And the math, the number of armed men in the room, the angles, the positions, the one innocent young woman on the floor behind the desk, was still not good. Rex had gone completely still beside him. Logan looked at Kane. You know what the problem is with men like you, Logan said. Kane waited. You've been the most dangerous thing in the room for so long. Logan let a single beat pass. You forgot how to recognize when you're not. Kane's jaw tightened, and Logan moved. He didn't go for Kane. That was the thing none of them expected. Every weapon in the room was calibrated for Logan Mercer to go for the man giving orders. That's what the sight lines assumed. That's what the spacing assumed. 5 men arrayed to cover the obvious move, the direct move, the movie move, where the hero goes straight at the villain and the rest sorts itself out. Logan went left. Not a dive, not a dramatic roll, just a single lateral step that took him behind the check-in desk in the same moment his left hand caught Tamara by the collar and pulled her down and behind the desk's solid particle board side panel. The SIG came up over the desk edge, and he put 2 rounds center mass into the nearest flanking man before the first spent casing hit the tile floor. The suppressor turned the shots into flat, dry cracks, loud enough in the enclosed space, quiet enough that the sleeping neighborhood outside stayed sleeping. The flanking man went down. The room erupted. Kane's remaining 4 men moved without coordinating, which was the tell. Logan had known it the moment he'd assessed their entry. They were professionals in terms of individual training, but they were not a unit. They hadn't worked together long enough to have the automatic synchrony that came from shared time in confined spaces. And that gap between individual capability and collective function was exactly the width of a mistake you could drive something through. Rex came through it first. The dog had been still as furniture for the last 40 seconds, which was its own kind of terrifying if you knew what that stillness meant. It meant he was loaded, coiled, waiting for the input that would release him. The input was the first shot. Rex launched himself over the desk in a single arc and hit the second flanking man at shoulder height, the impact rotating the man violently, the weapon arm going wide, and Rex redirected immediately to the forearm because that's where the gun was, and Rex had been trained by people who understood that the gun was the priority, not the man holding it. The man screamed. The gun went somewhere. Logan was already moving from behind the desk, using the confusion as cover, crossing the open floor in a low sprint toward the two men near the entrance who still had clear sightlines. The nearest one was tracking Rex, which was the wrong priority in a room that also contained Logan Mercer, and Logan made him pay for it. Inside the reach of the weapon in 3 steps, both hands on the gun arm, twisting it into the joint lock that went from uncomfortable to agonizing to structural failure in about a second and a half. And then the man's weapon was in Logan's hand, and the man was on the floor wondering what had happened to his elbow. 3 seconds, 2 men down, one more with Rex still occupying his arm and his attention. That left Kane and one man standing. The one man standing had Claire. He'd moved fast, faster than Logan had anticipated, which meant he was better than the others, which meant he'd been held back as the contingency, which meant Kane had planned for things to go wrong tonight, which told Logan something about the man's operational discipline, even if it didn't help him right now. The operative had Claire by the collar of her coat, gun pressed against the side of her head, using her as a barrier between himself and the room. Claire's good eye was open. She wasn't struggling. She was reading the room the same way Logan was, assessing, calculating, waiting for the variable to change. Kane hadn't moved. He was standing in the doorway where he'd been, the Glock still in his hand, watching Logan with the expression of a man revising his risk assessment in real time. There was something in his eyes that might have been anger or might have been something older than anger. The look of a man who'd spent decades being the one who changed other people's calculations, suddenly experiencing the reversal. "Stop," Kane said. Logan stopped. He had the recovered weapon up, aimed at the operative holding Claire. The geometry was bad. The operative had positioned himself intelligently, using Claire's body mass to cover his vital zones, only his right side and part of his head visible. "Put the weapon down," Kane said. Logan didn't. "Mr. Mercer." Kane's voice was still controlled, still patient, but there was something beneath it now. A pressure, a faint fracture line. "You've done something impressive tonight. I want you to understand that I recognize that. But this is where it ends. The drive, and you and the dog walk out of here." "And her?" Logan said. Kane was quiet for half a second. "She made her choices," he said. "So did you," Logan said. 31 years of them. And the one you're standing on right now, taking a hostage in a veterinary hospital at 3 in the morning on Christmas Eve, that's the one that ends all the others." "Pretty words," Kane said. "It's not words, it's math." Logan kept his eyes on the operative, not Kane. Federal investigators already have a copy of everything on that drive. The room went very still. Kane's expression didn't break. But something behind it shifted. A micro-movement, involuntary, the kind of thing 31 years of discipline almost succeeded in concealing. Almost. "You're lying," he said. "Am I?" Logan said. Claire had 3 days. She had a federal contact. Gabriel Ortega, DEA, out of the regional office. You think she spent 3 days running and didn't find a way to get at least a partial copy to someone outside your reach? It was a calculated gamble. Logan didn't know if it was true. He suspected it wasn't. Claire had said the meeting with Ortega was set for Christmas morning, implying it hadn't happened yet. But Kane didn't know what Logan knew, and the uncertainty was the weapon. Kane looked at Claire. Claire looked back at him with the particular expression of someone who has decided to be absolutely unreadable. "Everything you're doing right now," Logan continued, "is happening on the assumption that the drive in my hand is the only copy. If that assumption is wrong, you're not containing anything. You're just adding charges." Kane stared at Claire for a long moment. Then he said to the operative, "Marcus." The operative, Marcus, pressed the gun harder against Claire's temple, a reactive tightening, and Claire's jaw set, but she didn't flinch. "I want confirmation," Kane said to her directly. "Is there a copy?" "Go to hell, Victor," she said. "Claire." "You want me to help you figure out how much trouble you're in?" Her voice was level, each word deliberate. "After you sent 4 men to put me in the ground tonight, you can figure it out yourself." Kane studied her face, reading it the way he'd read faces for 31 years. What he found there, whatever it was, made something in him harden. He looked at Logan. "I don't think there's a copy," he said quietly. "I think you're buying time. I think Claire didn't make the meeting and didn't find another channel because she was running too hard to stop." He paused. "And I think you're smart enough to bluff, but honest enough that it shows when you do." Logan said nothing. "Last time," Kane said. "The drive, floor, Now. Rex had released the downed operative and was sitting 6 feet from Kane, watching him. The operative was curled against the wall holding his forearm, not a factor anymore. The man Logan had disarmed was still on the floor, conscious but not moving. 2 men down, Marcus with Claire, Kane with the Glock. The fish tank cycled blue light across the room. Logan looked at the drive in his left hand. Then he looked at Kane. He set the SIG down on the floor. Not a surrender, a deliberate movement, a choice, with a specific reason behind it that Kane would understand in about 4 seconds. "Okay," Logan said. Kane's eyes narrowed. "I'm gonna need both hands," Logan said, and dropped to one knee to reach for the drive with his right hand. A movement that put him low, changed his profile, and brought his right hand within 8 inches of the SIG he'd just put on the floor. Marcus shifted his attention to Logan for exactly the half second that Claire had been waiting for. She drove her elbow back into Marcus's solar plexus. Not a powerful strike. She didn't have the leverage or the strength for powerful right now. But she had precision, and the solar plexus doesn't require power. It requires accuracy. And Claire Dawson had been doing this for 15 years. Marcus exhaled explosively. His grip loosened for exactly 1 moment, and Claire dropped, not away from him, which he'd be expecting, but straight down, collapsing her own height, coming out from between Marcus and his weapon. Logan was already up. He covered the distance to Marcus in 2 strides and hit him with everything he had left. A right cross that he'd been loading since the moment he set the gun down. All of his weight and momentum and the accumulated fury of the last 3 hours concentrated into 4 square inches of impact. Marcus went back into the wall and didn't come forward again. Kane fired. The round caught Logan across the outside of his left arm. A graze, but a bad one. The kind that felt like someone had dragged a hot iron across your skin. The kind that told you about its existence immediately and loudly. Logan's left arm went partially numb, and he staggered, caught himself on the desk, turned. Kane had the Glock up, aimed at Logan's chest. His face was very still. "Done," Kane said. Logan straightened. His left arm was on fire. He could feel the warmth spreading down toward his elbow. He didn't look at it. "Done," he agreed. Rex was sitting between them, still. Looking at Kane the way he'd looked at the driver in the east lot, patient, impartial, with the particular quality of attention of an animal that has decided something and is simply waiting for the moment to execute it. Kane looked at the dog, then at Logan. "Call him off," Kane said. "He's not doing anything," Logan said. "Call him off." "Victor." Kane's eyes moved. Claire was on her feet. She'd gotten up from the floor, slow and deliberate, and was now standing 6 feet to Kane's left, holding Marcus's dropped weapon in both hands. Her grip was competent. Her stance was correct. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from blood loss, from the sustained physical demand of the last 3 hours. But the gun was steady in the way that really mattered, which was the direction it was pointed. "Put it down," she said. "Claire, Victor, put it down." Kane looked at her for a long time. The gun stayed up. His jaw moved slightly, like he was working through something internally, some calculation or recollection or both. "I built that department," he said. "Everything good it's done for 20 years. The organized crime clearance rates, the harbor security overhaul, the task force that took down the Delgado network in 19. That was me. That was my architecture." "I know," Claire said, "and you're going to burn it." "I'm going to burn the part of it that's you," she said. "The rest will still be standing." Something in Kane's face moved, not breaking, more like a very old structure experiencing a crack that had been growing for years and had finally reached the surface. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said. "The people behind this operation, the network this connects to, they are not the kind of organization that accepts exposure and regroups. They will come after everyone involved in taking them down. You understand that? Everyone." "I know," Claire said. "You're not scared," Kane said, and he sounded almost genuinely puzzled by it. "I'm terrified," she said. "I've been terrified for 8 weeks. It doesn't change anything." Another long silence. Then Kane lowered the Glock. Not all the way down. He kept it at his side, finger off the trigger, the posture of a man who hadn't fully committed to surrender, but had stopped committing to the alternative. He looked at Logan's arm, at the blood. "That needs attention," he said. "A lot of things need attention," Logan said. Dr. Vance appeared in the corridor doorway. She'd been back there, Logan realized, through the entire thing, and she'd stayed. She was holding a phone and looking at Kane with an expression that said she'd been listening, had understood the relevant parts, and had already made the call she needed to make. "I called 911, she said. Not defensive about it, just informational. Kane stared at her. "About 7 minutes ago," she added. "When the windows came in." Distant, somewhere north of Callaway Street, sirens. Kane heard them. His expression went through something, resignation, maybe, or the specific exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has just felt it taken from him. "Federal," Logan said to Kane. "You need federal. If local units respond first and they have your people in the dispatch chain." "I know," Kane said quietly. "Then call it, right now, before the first local unit rolls up. You call your DEA contact or FBI or whoever you have that's clean, and you make sure the first people through that door are federal." Kane looked at him. "Why would you want me to do that?" "Because the evidence on that drive goes away if your people get here first. Claire spent 8 weeks building it. I'd like it to survive the night." Something crossed Kane's face. It lasted about a second. Then he reached into his coat pocket and produced his personal phone, not the department issue, the personal one, and made a call. It rang twice. "This is Kane," he said. "I need federal response to the Callaway Street Animal Hospital, 14th and Callaway. Now, yes, I'm aware of the time." A pause. "Tell them to override local dispatch. This is a federal matter." Another pause. "I know," he said. "I know what this means." He ended this call and stood in the center of the destroyed waiting room with his gun at his side, and the snow coming in through the blown windows and the blue light from the fish tank moving slowly across the walls. Tamara was still behind the desk. She'd gotten herself into a corner and had been very small and very quiet, which was the right instinct. She was staring at Kane with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" Logan asked her. She thought about it for a second. "I think so," she said. "Is it over?" Logan looked at Claire. Claire looked at Kane. Kane sat down in one of the waiting room chairs. He set the Glock on the floor beside him and put both hands on his knees and stared at the middle distance with the expression of a man arriving, for the first time in a long time, somewhere he couldn't leave. "Yeah," Logan said. "I think so." Rex walked over to the chair where Kane was sitting and sniffed the man's hand once, in the way dogs investigate something unfamiliar. Kane looked down at him. He didn't pull his hand away. Rex satisfied himself with whatever information he'd gathered and walked back to Logan's side and sat down, his tail sweeping once across the tile floor. Logan lowered himself onto the edge of the reception desk because his left arm was telling him loudly that standing unsupported was negotiable and he should negotiate. He pressed his right hand against the graze. It was bleeding freely, but not arterially, manageable, the kind of wound that would need cleaning and stitching and several days of very pointed complaints from every muscle in his arm. Claire came and stood beside him. She didn't say anything, neither did he. Through the blown-out front windows, snow still fell on Callaway Street, soft and indifferent. The sirens were closer now, multiple units coming from the north and the east, blue and red light beginning to pulse at the far end of the block. Marcus was regaining consciousness against the wall and immediately looked like he regretted it. The operative with the ruined elbow was sitting up, holding it, watching Kane with an expression of profound confusion, as if the man he'd signed on with had turned out to be a different person than advertised, which was perhaps not an unreasonable assessment. Dr. Vance had disappeared and returned with a first aid kit, which she'd placed beside Logan without comment, and was now moving back through the clinic to check on her animals, because her animals were her priority, and she'd given the human disaster out front all the attention she was prepared to give it tonight. Logan opened the kit with his good hand. Claire took it from him and started cleaning the graze with the focused efficiency she applied to everything. Not gentle, exactly, but not careless either. He watched her work. "You lied," she said quietly. "About Ortega. About me getting a copy to him." "I know." Kane almost believed it. "He wanted to," Logan said. "That's the thing about men who've been in control for a long time. They want to believe there's a version of events where they're not as exposed as they are. It makes them pause." Claire was quiet for a moment. "It was the pause that mattered," she said. "Yeah." She applied a pressure dressing to his arm, efficient and clean, and then she sat beside him on the edge of the desk and they both looked at Victor Kane sitting in the waiting room chair, and the blue light from the fish tank moved over all of them, slow and constant, and outside the red and blue of federal vehicles was swelling at the end of Callaway Street. Kane looked up and caught Logan watching him. "You should know," Kane said, "this doesn't end with me. What I was protecting, the network, the people behind it, they'll adapt. They always adapt." "Let them adapt," Claire said. "They'll adapt in front of a grand jury." The first federal vehicles turned onto the block, their lights filling the destroyed windows of the Callaway Street Animal Hospital with something that for once looked less like warning and more like arrival. Logan looked at the drive in his hand. Still there. Still intact. He closed his fingers around it. Still intact. He closed his fingers around it and kept them closed and waited for what came next. The first federal agent through the door was a woman. That was the detail Logan filed away afterward, in the way he filed away details that didn't matter until they did. She came through the blown-out entrance at a controlled pace, weapon drawn but angled down, badge visible on her hip, scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd entered difficult spaces before and had learned to read them fast. 40s, dark coat, hair pulled back tight. Her eyes moved from Kane to the downed operatives to Claire to Logan to Rex, in that order, and then back to Kane. "Captain Kane," she said. "Supervisory Special Agent Torres," Kane said. He said it like he was reading something off a card, like the name had weight he was acknowledging. "Thank you for responding." Torres looked at the room, at the blown windows, at the blood on Logan's arm, at Claire, who was still sitting on the edge of the reception desk with a gun in her lap that she hadn't yet put down. "Detective Dawson," Torres said. Claire looked at her. "You know me?" "We've been looking for you for 48 hours. A beat. "You have," Claire said. It wasn't a question exactly, more like something clicking into alignment that she'd been uncertain about. "Ortega flagged your name through our task force channel 3 days ago. Said you might be coming in with material evidence of department-level corruption in Harbor City PD. Torres kept her voice neutral, professional. "He was worried when you missed the window." "Gabriel," Claire said quietly. "He's been running interference with local dispatch tonight, making sure our people got priority response." Torres finally holstered her weapon. "You want to tell me what happened in here?" "Not especially," Claire said. "But I will." Torres looked at Logan. "And you are?" "Mercer," he said. Logan Mercer. "I'm nobody." Torres took in his arm, the position he'd chosen on the desk, the dog at his feet, the very particular quality of stillness he had for a man who'd just been in the center of whatever this was. "Nobody," she repeated. "Retired," he said. "From?" "Navy." She studied him for about 2 seconds. "Stay available," she said, which was federal agent for "don't go anywhere," and moved toward Kane. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos in the specific way that federal responses to complex scenes tended to be. Organized on the surface, genuinely complicated underneath. More agents came through, paramedics followed. The downed operatives were assessed, cuffed, and separated. Marcus, who'd recovered enough to have opinions about the situation, was immediately disabused of the notion that his opinions mattered. Kane was separated from the room and placed in the back of a federal vehicle, which he entered without resistance and without drama, with the particular dignity of a man who'd already done the math and accepted the answer. Logan watched him go through the blown window. He didn't feel what he'd expected to feel, watching that. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Satisfaction, maybe, or the flat relief that came after something concluded. What he felt was more complicated. The kind of complicated that came from watching someone who'd built something real, a career, a structure, a version of himself that people had trusted, walk it all off a cliff because somewhere along the way the thing he'd built had become more important than the reason he'd built it. He'd seen that before. Different context, different uniform. The mechanism was the same. A paramedic reached him. Young guy, probably 25, with the careful confidence of someone recent enough in his training that he still wanted to do everything right. "Sir, the arm—" "I know about the arm," Logan said. "Can I look at it?" "Yeah." The kid peeled back the pressure dressing Claire had applied and made a small, involuntary sound. "This is a gunshot wound." "Grazing," Logan said. "It's still a gunshot wound, sir. I'm going to need to—" "I know what you're going to need to do. Do it." The kid did it, with competence, if not complete comfort. Logan watched the room while the arm was being dealt with. Claire was across the space, talking to Torres, and whatever she was saying with the focused intensity of someone who had been waiting weeks to say it. Her good eye was tracking, her posture was controlled despite everything her body was doing, and she had the particular quality of attention of someone who understands this conversation is the reason they survived the night. Rex was sitting beside a federal agent who'd made the mistake of appearing friendly and was receiving ear scratches with dignified patience. Dr. Vance was back with her animals. Tamara had been spoken to by 2 agents and was now sitting at her desk with a cup of something hot, staring at the blown windows with the expression of someone deciding whether this was the most interesting night of their life or the worst. Logan suspected from personal experience that it was both. Torres came for him at 4:12 a.m. She pulled a chair from the waiting room and sat it across from Logan's position on the desk, and sat down in it with the directness of someone who wasn't interested in preamble. "Mercer," she said. "Torres," he said, "tell me your version." "My version is the same as hers." "I know that. I still want to hear it separately," he told her. He was concise about it, habit, giving her the timeline in order, the decisions and the reasoning behind them, the tactical situation at each point. He didn't editorialize, he didn't leave things out. When he got to the part where he'd answered Kane's radio, Torres stopped him. "You impersonated a member of Kane's private security element." "I answered a radio." "Using a false identity to create the impression that his team was intact." "I told him Sierra 2 was clear. I didn't specify who Sierra 2 was." Torres looked at him with the particular expression of someone who recognizes a semantic argument and has chosen not to engage it. "The drive," she said. "Where is it?" Logan reached into his pocket and put it on the chair between them. Torres looked at it. She didn't pick it up immediately. "Claire said you found it in the dog's collar." "Yes." "And you didn't open it." "I don't have a way to open it. It's encrypted." "But even if you had," Logan looked at her. "It's her evidence, her 8 weeks. It's not mine." Torres picked up the drive and turned it in her fingers. "The harbor operation. The 6 containers Kane's people mentioned. 0430 movement window." She checked her watch. "That's 18 minutes from now." "I know. We have a team at the port already. We moved on that when Kane made the call." She looked at him. "He gave us the container numbers and the network contact on the receiving end." Logan was quiet for a moment. "He gave you that voluntarily?" "He made a choice," Torres said, in a tone that suggested she wasn't fully prepared to characterize it. Whatever it means for his sentencing, it's his choice to have made. Logan thought about Kane sitting in the federal vehicle, his hands on his knees, his particular careful stillness. "He said the network was bigger than him," Logan said. "That exposure wouldn't stop it." "It won't stop it completely. Nothing does that in one move." Torres stood up, pocketed the drive. "But it stops this piece, the harbor operation. Tonight's shipment. The infrastructure Kane spent 6 years building." She looked at Logan steadily. "That's not nothing." "No," he said. "It's not." She started to move, then stopped. "The 3 men you secured at the lighthouse warehouse, zip-tied to support columns." "Yes." "One of them has a dislocated shoulder." "He resisted," Logan said. "And the other one?" "They all resisted," Logan said. Torres looked at him for a moment. "I'm going to need a full written statement from you, detailed. Everything." "I know. Probably more than once." "I know that too." She nodded. "Get your arm looked at properly. The paramedic said you need sutures." "He's not wrong." She walked away. Then, without turning back, "Mercer, for what it's worth, good work tonight." He didn't answer that. He wasn't sure what the right answer was. It hadn't felt like good work while it was happening. It had felt like a series of bad options with no good ones visible, and moving through them as fast as possible before the next problem arrived. That was most of what he'd done, in uniform and out of it. The word good didn't attach naturally. Rex wandered back from the federal agent who'd been providing ear scratches and sat beside Logan. His hip was bothering him. Logan could see it in the way he settled, the slight accommodation he made. Dr. Vance's anti-inflammatory was probably wearing off. "I know," Logan said to him. "We'll get you something." Rex put his chin on Logan's good knee. The debrief that followed was long, procedural, and conducted in a mobile command unit that Torres's team had parked on the Callaway Street sidewalk. Logan spent 90 minutes in it across 2 separate sessions, the second of which included a DEA agent named Purcell, who had the energy of someone who'd been awake for 20 hours and had gotten progressively less interested in softening his questions as the night wore on. "You made the decision to not contact law enforcement on your own authority," Purcell said. "I made the decision based on the injured detective's explicit instruction and the operational picture as I understood it. Her instruction, not a legal authority. Her instruction not to call the agency that had just tried to kill her," Logan said, "which I evaluated as reasonable given the circumstances. You're not a law enforcement officer. No. You have no legal standing to make those kinds of operational decisions. I have the standing of any private citizen who finds an injured person and makes reasonable decisions about their care and safety." Logan kept his voice level. "I didn't arrest anyone. I restrained individuals who were actively trying to kill me and the person I was with, using reasonable force. Everything I did tonight falls within self-defense parameters." Purcell looked at him with the specific irritation of someone who knows the argument they're hearing is technically correct and finds that annoying. "Your military background," Purcell said. "SEAL teams." "What unit?" "DevGru," Logan said. "3rd Squadron, 12 years, 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq, 3 classified operations I'm not going to discuss without the appropriate cleared personnel in the room, which you are not." A pause. "DevGru," Purcell repeated. "Yes." Purcell wrote something down. He was quiet for a moment. "Why'd you get out?" It was outside the scope of the debrief, and they both knew it. Logan looked at him. "Medical," he said. "The arm that got shot tonight or something else?" "Something else." Purcell waited. "Not relevant to tonight," Logan said. Purcell put his pen down. He looked at Logan with less of the prosecutorial quality from earlier and more of something that might have been simple curiosity, the way people got when they encountered something that didn't fit the category they'd been applying. Most people who find a dying detective in a snowstorm call 911 and wait. Most people who find a dying detective in a snowstorm didn't spend 12 years developing a strong aversion to waiting, Logan said. Purcell almost smiled. He recovered from it quickly. "We're going to need you available for the next several days, possibly a week. There'll be a federal grand jury process, and I know how it works," Logan said. "I'll be available." "You have a permanent address?" Logan gave him the apartment on Halstead Street. Purcell wrote it down. "Don't leave the city." "I live here," Logan said. "Where would I go?" "Hotab." They led him back into the clinic at 20 minutes past 6. The street outside had transitioned from federal crisis response to federal investigation. The dramatic elements concluded, the procedural ones beginning. Evidence technicians moved through the building. The blown windows had been covered with plastic sheeting that snapped and billowed in the cold wind coming off the harbor. The fish tank was still cycling. The bulletin board with Sergeant's photo was still on the wall, undisturbed by everything that had happened around it. Claire was in the back of the clinic. Dr. Vance had moved her to one of the treatment rooms. Not because it was ideal for a human patient, but because it was private, warm, and better equipped than the destroyed waiting room. A paramedic had done what he could, which was substantial. Claire was on a cot, her coat off, fresh bandaging on the wound, an IV line that someone had sourced from somewhere running into her left arm. She was upright, which told Logan about her. She had her personal phone back. Torres had recovered it from Marcus, who'd had it in his vest pocket, and she was looking at the screen when Logan came in. Not reading, exactly. Just looking at it. He sat in the chair beside the cot. "Ortega's flying in," she said. "First available out of the regional office. He lands at 8. "Good. Torres is briefing him en route." She set the phone face down on the blanket. "They got the containers. All 6. At the port. Before the movement window." "I heard." Kane gave them the container IDs and the network contact. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't expect that." "People do unexpected things when the alternative becomes real," Logan said. "He's been carrying the idea of exposure for years. The idea is different from the moment." "Don't explain him to me," she said. "I'm not explaining him. I'm explaining the mechanism." She looked at him. "There's a difference?" "Yeah, the mechanism is useful. Understanding the mechanism means you can predict the next one. Understanding him..." Logan shrugged with his good shoulder. That's yours to work out. Claire was quiet for a while. The IV dripped. Somewhere in the back of the clinic, Sargent shifted in his bay, and one of the overnight staff murmured something low and reassuring in response. Purcell gave you a hard time, she said. It wasn't a question. Purcell was doing his job. He asked about your discharge. Yes. What did you tell him? Medical, Logan said. That's what's in the file, Claire said. I looked you up. 3 hours after we got here, while you were in the second debrief. She held his gaze without apology. Old habit. What'd you find? DevGru. 12 years. Classified operational record. 2 letters of commendation and a medical separation that references a TBI evaluation and what the file describes as adjustment disorder following operational stress. She said the clinical phrase with the specific flatness of someone who recognizes bureaucratic language being applied to something that doesn't fit inside it. Which tells me something happened. Things happen, Logan said. Logan. He looked at the floor for a moment, the specific floor of a veterinary treatment room at 6 in the morning on Christmas Day, which was not a floor he'd ever imagined having a conversation on. We lost 3 people on an op in 21, he said. Mosul adjacent. The kind of thing that gets classified at a level where you can't even describe it to your therapist in specifics, which makes the therapy interesting. He paused. The TBI was real, IED, secondary blast, nothing severe on the imaging, but enough to affect sleep and what the doctors diplomatically called threat response calibration. Hypervigilance, Claire said. That's the word they use. And the walks, at 2 in the morning. Dr. Holt's idea. She thinks fresh air and rhythm settle the nervous system. He glanced at her. She's probably going to find tonight's walk hard to categorize. Something moved across Claire's face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. The kind of expression that required more energy than she had, but surfaced anyway because it was genuine. How long have you been out? She said. 3 years. And before tonight, what were you doing? Working security consulting, freelance, government contractors mostly. The kind of work that uses the skills without requiring you to be fully operational. He looked at his bandaged arm. Relatively low impact. Right, she said dryly. Until tonight. Until tonight. Rex came through the treatment room door. Someone had left it ajar, and arranged himself on the floor between the cot and the chair, taking up most of the available space with the unself-conscious confidence of a dog who'd assessed the relevant parties and determined that being between them was the correct position. He's good, Claire said, looking at the dog. He knows. How old? 8. Hip's been bad since Kandahar. He doesn't act like an old dog. He doesn't know he's old, Logan said, or he knows and doesn't care. I've never been able to tell the difference with him. She reached down with her free hand, the one without the IV, and put it on Rex's back. The dog didn't react with enthusiasm. He just accepted the contact with the same impartial patience with which he accepted most things, and his tail moved once. I need to ask you something, she said. Okay. When Torres offered you the out, she didn't offer me an out. She could have, Claire said. At several points tonight you could have stepped back. You were a civilian. Nobody could have required you to stay in it once we cleared the port. Logan didn't respond immediately. Why didn't you, she said. He thought about it. Not about the answer. He knew the answer. He was thinking about whether the answer made sense outside his own head, which was a different question. You said every version you ran, you were alone, he said finally. Yes. I've run those versions too, different contexts, they end the same way. He looked at his hands. I don't do well with the versions where you leave somebody. Claire held his gaze for a moment, then she looked at the ceiling. The network, she said. Kane was right that it doesn't end with him. The drive has financial routing information, shell companies, offshore accounts, intermediary organizations. The weapons components were being moved to a buyer my 8 weeks of work didn't fully identify. Torres knows that. Yes. The grand jury process is going to be long and ugly. Yes. And whoever the buyer is, whatever organization was on the receiving end of those 6 containers, they're going to know by this morning that the shipment was interdicted. Yes, Logan said, which means they're going to know that someone delivered the evidence that made that happen. He didn't answer that one. I'm saying there's exposure going forward, she said. Not just the trial. After. I understood you. I'm not trying to... Claire, he said. I've had exposure before. I know what it costs. He looked at her directly. I'm not walking it back because of what comes next. She was quiet for a moment. Just wanted to make sure you knew what you signed on for, she said. I signed on for a midnight walk, he said. Everything else was adjacent. And Rex? Does Rex know what he signed on for? Rex signed on for the hip injection and the red-filtered light rig, neither of which he was fully briefed on. Rex opened one eye, looked at Logan, and closed it again. Torres came in at 7:15 with two things, coffee in paper cups, and a federal agent named Haskell who had a recorder and a specific set of questions for Claire that had to be answered before Ortega landed. Logan took his coffee and went into the corridor to give them the room. He stood in the hallway outside the treatment rooms and drank the coffee, which was terrible in the specific way that institutional coffee at 7 in the morning always was, and listened to the clinic doing what it did, the small sounds of animals being cared for, a door opening and closing in the back, water running somewhere. Through the narrow window at the end of the corridor, Harbor City was getting light. The first gray suggestion of dawn was at the eastern edge of the sky, above the roofline and the snow-covered street, the kind of light that came at the end of a December night when it came at all. Reluctant, tentative, arriving as if it wasn't sure of its welcome. Logan put his back against the wall and thought about his therapist and what he was going to tell her at the next session. Fresh air, he was going to say. Rhythm. Just like you said, Dr. Vance came out of Sergeant's Bay and moved down the corridor. She stopped when she saw Logan. How's the arm? She said. Manageable. You should go to an ER. I will. She looked at him with the evaluating gaze she'd aimed at various people throughout the night. You're not going to, are you? Eventually, he said. She made a sound that acknowledged this was probably the best answer she was going to get. Sergeant is comfortable, she said. He slept through most of it. He tends to sleep through things. A pause. The collar. I want to get him a new one. The one he has, the meaning it has now, after tonight. I don't know. It seems like it should stay with the evidence. I think Torres will handle that, Logan said. Okay. She started to move on, then stopped. Mr. Mercer, sir. Logan. Logan, what she did, hiding it there, with Sergeant. She paused. That's trust in something very specific. You understand that? I do, he said. I want to make sure someone noticed that, she said. That it wasn't just a clever hiding spot, that she chose him specifically. Logan nodded. I noticed. Dr. Vance moved on down the corridor. Logan finished the coffee, crumpled the cup, found a trash receptacle and put it in there and stood for a moment looking at the window at the end of the hall and the slow, incremental arrival of Christmas morning above the roofline of Calloway Street. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He picked up. Mercer. A man's voice. Calm. Accented slightly. Caribbean, possibly, or somewhere in that latitude. My name is Ortega. I'm 30 minutes from landing. Torres says you were the one with Claire tonight. Yes. She's okay? She's talking to your people right now. She's hurt, but she's functional. The drive, Torres has it. A pause. I want to talk to you when I land. In person. Torres already told me to stay available. This is separate from what Torres wants. This is me asking. Another pause. Claire doesn't trust easily. Never has. Doesn't trust people she doesn't know. Doesn't trust situations she can't control. What you did tonight, she let you in. You understand what that means coming from her? Logan looked at the treatment room door down the hall. I'm beginning to, he said. Good, Ortega said. 30 minutes. And the line went dead. Logan put the phone in his pocket and went back down the corridor. He stopped outside the treatment room, could hear Claire's voice through the door. Steady, detailed. The voice she used when she was building something systematically, laying down one piece and then the next. The debrief voice. 12 years of police work in every cadence of it. He didn't go in. He went back to the waiting room, moved a chair so it faced the bulletin board with Sergeant's photo on it, and sat down. Rex appeared from somewhere and settled at his feet. Outside on Calloway Street, the light was coming up clean and cold over a city that had been asleep through all of it. Through the port and the lighthouse, and the stolen SUV, and the blown windows, and the man with 31 years on his badge sitting in the back of a federal vehicle deciding what was left to give. All of it, while the city slept. Logan sat in the warmth of the Callaway Street Animal Hospital with his arm aching and his coffee gone and a dog at his feet, and waited for what Christmas morning had left to bring. Ortega landed at 8:04 a.m. Logan knew because Torres came into the waiting room at 8:11 and said he's here to nobody in particular, and 12 minutes after that a man came through the clinic's front entrance, the plastic sheeting over the blown windows letting in a slice of cold morning air when it moved, and filled the doorway in the specific way that some people filled doorways, not with physical size, but with a quality of presence that the room immediately adjusted to. Gabriel Ortega was maybe 50, compact, dark-complected, wearing a coat that said he'd left somewhere warmer in a hurry. He had the kind of face that had been handsome at 30 and had become something more interesting since, weathered, precise, with eyes that moved through the space the way Logan's did, cataloging, assessing, settling on the relevant variables. He found Logan in the chair facing the bulletin board and crossed the waiting room without stopping. Mercer. He extended a hand. Logan stood and took it. Ortega, how's your arm? People keep asking me that. Because you got shot and you're not at a hospital, Ortega said. Where's Claire? Treatment room. Haskell's been with her for an hour. I know. I talked to Haskell on the way in. Ortega looked at the bulletin board. At Sargent's photo. He was quiet for a moment. She used the dog. Yes. That's Claire, he said, in the tone of someone confirming something they already understood about a person. He turned from the board and looked at Logan with the direct, evaluating quality that Logan had heard in his voice on the phone. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it straight. Okay? When you found her, in the port, her condition, your honest assessment, how close was it? Logan thought about it. The specific kind of thought that involved accuracy rather than reassurance. Another 40 minutes in that temperature, with that blood loss, in that wind, she doesn't make it to morning. Ortega absorbed that without visible reaction, which was its own kind of reaction. She would tell you she'd have figured something out, Logan said. She would, Ortega agreed. She'd be wrong, but she would tell you that. He put his hands in his coat pockets. I've known Claire Dawson for 5 years. I recruited her for an embedded assignment in 2021 that she was too good at, which is the problem with her. She goes too deep and stays too long and comes back different every time. You recruited her, Logan said, and you didn't have a contingency in place for when things went sideways? Ortega looked at him. The look said, that's fair, and I know it. She went dark on me, he said, 8 weeks ago, when she found the Kane material. She made the call to go silent because she was worried about my communication channels. She thought Kane might have reach into DEA administrative infrastructure. Does he? We're finding out. A pause. She was probably right to worry, which is the other problem with her. She's usually right, and she knows she's usually right, and it makes her willing to carry things alone that she shouldn't have to carry alone. Logan said nothing. He understood what Ortega was and wasn't saying. The grand jury, Ortega said. Timeline is going to be aggressive. Torres is building the federal case from the drive material starting today. Kane is cooperating. More than cooperating, actually. He started talking in the vehicle on the way to processing and didn't stop. What is he giving you? Everything, Ortega said. Names, routing, the buyer network on the receiving end of the harbor shipments, 2 additional ports he was managing under the same arrangement, financial account structures going back to 2018. He paused. He knows what cooperation looks like at this level. He's been in the room when other people did it. He knows what it buys, and he's buying it. Does it buy enough? For his sentencing? Probably significantly. For the people above him in the network? Ortega's expression was steady. It's a thread. The right thread pulled in the right direction can unravel something substantial, or it can break. We won't know for a while. He looked at Logan with the same directness from before. Torres told me what you did in here last night. The room. The geometry of it. Torres wasn't in the room. No, but she knows how to read a scene, and the scene told her most of it. The rest she got from Tamara. He tilted his head slightly. You gave Kane the option to call federal response before local units arrived. You told him to do it. The evidence would have disappeared if his people got here first. That's the practical reason, Ortega said. I'm asking about the other one. Logan looked at him. You gave a man who'd spent the night trying to kill you and Claire the opportunity to do one thing right before it was over, Ortega said. That's not tactical. That's something else. I don't know what you want me to say about that. I don't want you to say anything about it. I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly. A long pause. You are, Logan said. Ortega nodded, as if that confirmed his assessment of something larger. He reached into his coat and produced a card. Federal, plain, just a name and 2 numbers. My direct line and my cell. When Torres brings you in for follow-up depositions, and she will multiple times over the next several weeks, call me if anything about the process becomes complicated. Logan took the card. Complicated how? Complicated in the sense that you were a private citizen operating in a federal matter, and some people in the process will want to make that uncomfortable for you in order to establish the boundary clearly. Ortega's voice was matter of fact. The boundary exists, but what you did tonight also exists. Those 2 things can coexist if the right people are managing the framing, and you're one of the right people. I'm one of them, Ortega said. Claire is another, and she has opinions about the people who helped her. He moved toward the treatment room. Juan. They let Logan in at 9. Haskell was gone. Ortega had been in for 20 minutes and was finishing when Logan appeared in the doorway, and Ortega looked at him and then at Claire and said, I'll give you a few minutes, in the tone of a man who'd already said the things that needed to be said between them and was stepping out of the way of the ones that didn't involve him. He pulled the door closed behind him. Claire was sitting up on the cot. The IV was out. The line had been removed sometime in the last hour, a small bandage taped over the site on her inner arm. She was wearing a borrowed sweatshirt that was 3 sizes too large, Tamara's, Logan suspected, from the cartoon cats on the front that were inconsistent with everything else about Claire Dawson. Her color was better than it had been at any point in the last 7 hours. Still pale, still marked by everything the night had done to her, but the white at the edges quality was gone. Her good eye found him. The other one was beginning to open slightly, the swelling working its way toward the yellowish-purple stage that meant the worst of the acute trauma was past. Ortega read me in on the Kane cooperation, she said. I know, he told me most of it. Kane gave them 2 more ports. She said it flatly, like someone reading an inventory. Baltimore and Savannah. Same network, same routing, different logistics managers. 6 years, Logan. He built an entire parallel infrastructure underneath the legitimate one, and nobody saw it. Somebody saw it, Logan said. She looked at him. 8 weeks ago, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I should have seen it sooner. Probably, Logan said. She blinked. Most people would have offered something softer. But you saw it when you saw it, he continued, and you didn't look away from it. That's the part that matters. Very motivational, she said dryly. I'm not trying to motivate you. I'm being accurate. She looked at the cartoon cats on the sweatshirt for a moment. Then she looked at the treatment room door, then back at him. Ortega asked me what I want to do next, she said. What did you tell him? I told him I wanted to sleep for 4 days and then think about it. A pause. He said that was reasonable. It is. He also said... She stopped. Started again. There's a federal task force, cross-agency, organized crime and port security, building off the Kane material. Ortega is one of 3 supervisors. He asked if I wanted to be part of it. As a detective? As a federal consultant, initially, then potentially an agent track if I want to go that direction. She looked at the wall. I've been Harbor City PD for 11 years. It's the only thing I've ever been. Is it the only thing you've ever wanted to be? The question sat between them. No, she said after a moment. But it's what I was good at. What I understood. You're good at finding things people hide, Logan said, and following them to wherever they lead, even when where they lead is somewhere nobody wants to look. The badge is infrastructure. It's not the thing itself. She considered that. That's either very wise or very easy to say from the outside. Probably both, he said. Rex came in through the partially open door. He'd learned the door's tolerance sometime in the last hour, and went directly to Claire's cot, putting his head on the edge of it beside her hand. She looked down at him. He does that, Logan said. I noticed. She put her hand on Rex's head. He accepted it with the same impartial patience as before, and his tail moved twice. He's going to need that hip looked at properly. Dr. Vance already told me. Follow up next week. Make sure you do it. I will. People say that and then they don't. Claire. What? I'll take care of the dog. She pressed her lips together, which was the expression she used when she was accepting something without wanting to make a thing of accepting it. Okay. A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that had earned its place between two people who'd been through something together and didn't need to fill it. What about you? She said finally. What about me? Ortega also asked about you. He asked what your situation was, what you wanted. He asked you that? He was being thorough. Logan looked at the window. Morning light was fully established now, the gray of the early hours burning off to something cleaner. The particular blue-white brightness that followed a heavy snowstorm when the sky cleared and the light came back harder than before. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know you well enough to answer that question. She paused. Which is true and also not entirely true after tonight. I don't know what I want, Logan said. That's the actual answer. I've been figuring out how to be a person who's not in the middle of something for 3 years, and I haven't finished figuring it out. And then tonight happened. Does tonight make it harder or easier? He thought about it genuinely, which was the only kind of thinking the question deserved. Different, he said. It makes it different. The figuring out doesn't change, but the shape of what I'm figuring out toward... He paused. I don't know. Something shifted, she repeated, not mocking it, just acknowledging that it was an honest answer even if it wasn't a neat one. Yeah. She looked at him for a moment. Ortega is going to want to talk to you about the task force, she said, before you leave today. He's going to ask about your skill set in the context of a longer-term consultancy arrangement. He mentioned that. He's good at what he does, and he's not stupid about people. She looked at Rex, still with his head on the cot beside her hand. If he asks, you should at least hear what he's offering before you say no. Who said I was going to say no? She looked up at him. I said I don't know what I want, Logan said. That's different from no. Something in her expression shifted, not the almost smile from before, something more settled than that. Fair enough, she said. He left the clinic at 10:15. Torres caught him on the sidewalk, handed him a document with a contact number and a date, first deposition, January 3rd, Federal Building downtown, and told him to get the arm properly treated, which was the third time he'd been told that. And he told her he would, which was the third time he'd said it. Ortega came out behind her and walked with Logan to the edge of the sidewalk, out of Torres's earshot. I'm going to put together a formal proposal, Ortega said, written with specifics. What the consultancy would involve, timeline, compensation. I'll send it through Torres's office so it's on the record. Okay. Don't decide anything until you rats it. I won't. Ortega looked at him. She trusts you, Claire. I want you to understand what I said earlier. That's not a small thing. It's possibly the least small thing about this entire situation. Logan didn't answer that. I'm going to make sure she's taken care of through the transition, Ortega said. Medical, logistics, security, while the grand jury is active. She's not going to be alone in this. Good, Logan said. I thought you should know. I appreciate it. Ortega put out his hand again. Logan took it. And then Ortega went back inside, and Logan stood on the sidewalk with Rex beside him and looked at Callaway Street in the morning. The snow from the night before had settled and stilled. The street was white and clean and quiet in the way that Christmas morning streets always were. The city operating on a different schedule, slower, more deliberate, the usual friction of the place turned down. A few cars had come through and left tracks in the snow. A set of footprints went east along the sidewalk and disappeared around the corner. At the end of the block, the federal vehicles were still parked, but the intensity around them had downshifted from active operation to administrative processing. Harbor Grayport was 4 miles south. Somewhere down there, Torres's team was working 6 containers that hadn't moved. Somewhere in a federal processing facility, a man with 31 years on his record was talking to lawyers and federal prosecutors and making the kinds of calculations that determined what remained of a life after the central thing that organized it had been taken away. Logan thought about Kane for a moment. Not with anger, The anger had been a tool last night, and tools went back in the kit when the job was done. He thought about him the way you thought about a system that had failed, trying to understand the failure point. What had bent first? How long the bending had been happening before anything broke? 6 years. Maybe longer. The harbor had been Kane's territory for 2 decades. He'd known every crane and container and shipping lane. He'd known the customs officers and the harbor authority officers and the Coast Guard rotation schedules. He'd known it the way people knew things they'd protected for long enough that the protecting and the knowing had blurred together, and at some point, some specific unrecoverable point, the knowing had become an asset to be monetized rather than a responsibility to be maintained. Logan didn't know when that point was. Kane probably didn't either anymore. Those transitions didn't announce themselves. They happened in the margins of small decisions, each one barely distinguishable from the last, until one day you were standing in a veterinary clinic in the middle of the night, trying to recover evidence from a dying woman and wondering how you got there. He looked down at Rex. Rex was watching the street with the calm, comprehensive attention he applied to any environment, cataloging it, filing it, deciding it was manageable. The old hip was bothering him. Logan could see it in the slight shift of weight off the left rear leg. Not dramatically. Rex would not give dramatic to a hip injury, it wasn't in his nature, but it was there. "Come on," Logan said. They walked east on Callaway Street. I went to the ER on Morrison Avenue because it was the closest, and because his arm had started talking to him in a register that said, "This is no longer optional," and because Dr. Vance, Tamara, Torres, and the young paramedic had collectively made it clear that continuing to defer was an argument he was going to lose eventually. The ER on Christmas morning was quiet in a particular way. Not empty, but running at a different frequency than a regular day. A nurse at the intake desk looked at Logan's arm and the dried blood on his jacket and did not ask how it happened, which he appreciated. She was 50, efficient, with the manner of someone who'd been doing this long enough to have a highly calibrated threshold for things that required explanation versus things that just required treatment. She looked at Rex, who had come in with Logan because Logan hadn't left him in the SUV and hadn't been going to. "Service animal?" she said. "Yes," Logan said. She looked at Rex. Rex looked at her. She wrote something on the intake form and moved on, and Logan decided she was among the more sensible people he'd encountered in the last 12 hours, which was a field with some decent competition. They stitched the arm in a curtain bay. 11 stitches, local anesthetic, a doctor named Ferreira, who was young and thorough and asked the same question as everyone else, which Logan answered the same way. "Grazing injury, fell on ice, it's fine." Ferreira looked at the wound pattern and said, "Uh-huh," in a tone that indicated he was not under any illusions about ice, but he was also a doctor on Christmas morning and he chose his battles. Rex sat in the corner of the bay and watched the procedure with what appeared to be academic interest. "His hip bothering him?" Ferreira said, not looking up from the suturing. "How'd you know?" "The way he sat down, compensating on the right." "Old injury?" "Kandahar," Logan said. Ferreira glanced up briefly, then back down. "I did a civilian medical deployment there, 2019. What was it like?" "Long," Ferreira said, "and then longer." He finished the suturing in silence, taped it cleanly, and gave Logan a prescription for antibiotics, and a look that said, "Actually fill this one before moving on to the next curtain." Logan sat in the bay for a few minutes after the doctor left. His arm was numb from the anesthetic and would stay that way for another 2 hours, which he understood was a temporary condition that he should not interpret as the problem being resolved. His phone buzzed. Claire. A text, not a call. "Ortega is arranging transfer to Riverside Medical, proper surgery and monitoring. Torres says 2 or 3 days minimum. Merry Christmas, I guess." He typed back. "Merry Christmas. Tell Ortega the proposal can wait until you're out." 3 dots appeared. Then, "He already knows that. He's not as pushy as he seems." Then, after a pause, "Thank you for not calling." He looked at those 4 words for a moment. For not calling. 6 hours ago, she'd spent her last conscious breath on a warning rather than a plea, and now in the cold blue light of a Christmas morning ER, the thing she was thanking him for was the same thing. Not the fighting, not the driving, not the 3 men in the lighthouse or the SUV or the confrontation with Kane. The first decision. The one he'd made in the dark in a blizzard in the 30 seconds between finding her and the moment she lost consciousness. He typed back, "You're welcome." He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Rex. "Ready?" Rex stood up, hip and all, and went to the bay curtain and waited. They walked home. It was 4 miles from the Morrison Avenue ER to the apartment on Halsted Street, and it was Christmas morning, and the streets were clean and white and quiet, and Logan's arm was numb and his body was running on whatever came after the second wind, but he walked anyway because the alternative was a cab, and he didn't want a cab. He wanted the distance. He wanted the cold and the quiet, and the specific quality of a city at rest, the city he'd been living in for 3 years without fully inhabiting, moving through it in the margins of things, doing work that used his skills without requiring his presence in any real sense. Rex walked beside him on the empty sidewalks. They went past the Morrison Avenue fire station, where one of the crew was outside stringing a sagging Christmas banner across the apparatus bay door, and nodded at Logan as he passed. They went past a bakery that was open, the smell of it reaching the sidewalk, coffee and something warm. And Logan went in and bought 2 cups and a pastry he didn't need and ate it on the sidewalk because it was there and because he hadn't eaten since before midnight and his body had strong opinions about that. He gave Rex a piece of it, which the dog accepted with the dignity of someone receiving what they were owed. They walked. He thought about the task force, about Ortega's proposal and what it would look like on paper and whether the thing he'd been doing for 3 years, the careful maintenance of a low-profile, low-stakes existence, the therapy and the walks and the freelance contracts that kept him functional without requiring him to be fully operational, whether that was a strategy or a holding pattern. He thought he'd been telling himself it was a strategy. I thought it had probably been a holding pattern. The night had done something to that distinction, not resolved it. Logan was not naive enough to think one night changed the architecture of what 3 years of difficult reorientation had built in him. The hypervigilance was still there. The sleep would still be bad, possibly worse for a while. The brain processing new material on top of old. Dr. Holt was going to have significant thoughts about this session. But underneath all of that, underneath the damage and the management and the careful daily work of remaining a functional person, there was something that had moved last night. He could feel the absence of where it had been, something that had been frozen. He didn't push at it. He let it be what it was and kept walking. Well, the apartment on Halsted was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been built in the 1940s and had not been substantially updated since, which Logan had chosen specifically because it had thick walls and a clear sight line from the front windows down both directions of the street and a back stairwell that nobody used. Rex's dog bed was against the radiator in the living room, positioned in the corner that had the best natural surveillance angle on the front door, which was either habit or instinct or both. Logan had never decided. He unlocked the door and went in and stood in the entry for a moment. The apartment was the same as he'd left it at midnight, which was logical and also carried a slightly strange quality, the way all spaces did when you return to them after something significant, the familiar made briefly unfamiliar by what you'd brought back with you. Rex went directly to his bed and lowered himself onto it with the controlled care of an animal managing discomfort without advertising it. Logan sat on the couch. He was going to sleep. His body was already organizing itself in that direction. The specific weighted heaviness that came after sustained adrenaline finally withdrew and left you with the bill. He'd sleep, and he'd sleep badly, and in the morning he'd be stiff and sore, and his arm would have opinions, and at some point in the next few days he'd sit across from Dr. Holt and attempt to describe the last 12 hours in terms she could work with, which was going to be an interesting conversation. But before he slept, he sat for a moment in the quiet of the apartment on Halsted Street and let the night sit with him. Claire Dawson in the snow. 6 words. The badge in his hand and the 30-second decision about who to trust and whether to move. He hadn't hesitated. That was the thing he kept returning to, not because he was certain. He hadn't been certain of anything last night except the immediate tactical picture and the immediate tactical requirements. He'd been uncertain about almost everything else. Uncertain whether he was reading her correctly, uncertain whether the risk was justified, uncertain whether the version of himself that could navigate what followed was still sufficiently intact after 3 years of careful, controlled diminishment. It had turned out to be sufficiently intact. That was information. Uncomfortable information, the kind that came with responsibility attached, but information. His phone was on the cushion beside him. He picked it up and opened the text thread with Claire and looked at the last exchange, and then he put the phone face down and looked at the ceiling. Rex was already asleep. His chest rose and fell in the slow rhythm of a dog that had done its job and had no unresolved questions about the matter. The hip would be what the hip was. The work was done. Sleep was what came next. Logan closed his eyes. 3 days later, he got the call from Ortega. The proposal was detailed, specific, and better than he'd expected in 2 of its 3 components. He called back the same afternoon and said he wanted to discuss the second component before agreeing. Ortega said that was reasonable. They talked for 40 minutes and reached an arrangement that wasn't perfect but was workable, which Logan had learned was the best available category for most things that mattered. He told Dr. Holt about it at their next session. She asked how he felt about it. He said, like something that had been stopped is moving again. And then he said it wasn't that simple because it wasn't, and she said she knew, and they worked through the part that wasn't simple for the rest of the hour the way they always did, carefully, without resolution, with the understanding that carefully without resolution was its own form of progress. Rex got his hip injection on the 28th. Dr. Vance administered it herself, and Sargent was in his bay at the end of the corridor, and Rex went and stood outside the bay door for a moment before they left, and Sargent lifted his gray head from the mat and looked back at him. They looked at each other for a moment in the way that old dogs looked at things, without agenda, without performance, with the unadorned attention of creatures that had never learned to look away from what was in front of them. Then Rex turned and walked back to Logan, and they went home. Claire was discharged from Riverside Medical on December 28th, 3 days after Christmas, 2 days ahead of the doctor's initial estimate because she was Claire, and the doctors had apparently not been briefed on that. Logan was in the hospital lobby when she came down, because Ortega had texted him the time and he'd gone, and he didn't overthink the going. She came off the elevator in her own clothes, clean, her own. Someone had gotten them from wherever she'd been staying before the night at the port. The swelling around her eye had gone from purple to yellow-green, which was ugly in a way that meant healing. She was moving carefully but without the managed stillness of before, the stillness of someone suppressing, not managing. She saw him and stopped for a half second, then kept walking. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know. How's the arm?" 11 stitches, itches, healing. "Rex?" "Hip injection went well. He's in the car." She looked at him. "You brought him?" "He wanted to come." "He's a dog. He can't want things." "You'd be surprised," Logan said. She almost smiled. Got most of the way there. They walked out of Riverside Medical into the cold, clear air of the 28th of December, the city between one year and the next, neither here nor there. The sky was the particular hard blue of winter at full strength, the kind that looked almost artificial, too saturated to be casual about. Rex was in the back of Logan's truck and stood when he saw them coming, tail moving. Claire stopped beside the truck and looked at him through the window. Rex put his nose against the glass. She put her hand against it from the outside, and they stayed like that for a moment. The old dog and the battered detective, the glass between them, the December cold around them. And something passed between them that Logan couldn't name and didn't try to. She got in the passenger seat. Logan got in the driver's seat. Rex settled in the back. None of them said anything for a moment. Then Claire said, "Where are we going?" Logan looked at the road ahead, at the city spread out beyond the hospital parking lot, the streets and the rooftops and the harbor somewhere to the south, the cranes still standing against the winter sky. "I know a place that makes decent coffee," he said. "Open on the 28th, about 12 minutes from here." "Decent," she repeated. "That's a low bar." "It's an honest one." She looked out the window. "Okay," she said. He pulled out of the lot and into the street, and they drove through the city together, the 3 of them, in the last days of a year that none of them would ever fully explain to anyone who hadn't been there. The cold, the port, the 6 words in the snow, and what it cost and what it made possible. And the particular grace that lives not in the absence of damage, but in what damaged people choose to do anyway, for each other, in the dark, when it would be easier to walk away. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to stay.